Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's live webinar here at Recal. I am Anthony LaRubio. I'm so thrilled that you're here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now, and we'll get rolling here as people start to drop into our session. So, if you would like to, at least, go ahead and message the chat here on our Zoom. And if you are watching it on YouTube, you can go ahead and here, I'm just going to admit a couple of folks here. Welcome, welcome, welcome. If you're just joining here, if you could, as I had mentioned already, for those of you watching either on YouTube or in the Zoom, whichever platform that you joined on, if you want to, you can message the chat and just share your location, your name if you'd like to, and what's your next big challenge in the mountains. I would love to hear that from you. We're going to get started here in just a moment as those answers come rolling in. I want to thank you very much for joining. If this is the first time that you have ever met me, I'm Anthony LaRubio from here at Recal Travel. I'm the founder and head coach here. I'm also a multi-certified breathwork training coach, and I'm excited to walk you through the entire everything we have to offer in terms of high altitude breathwork training and how it relates to mountain athletes and your ambitions on the mountain. So I see that we've got Umar in here from Pakistan. Hey, Umar, great to have you here. I appreciate you joining. I would really love to hear what you're up to next. But we're going to go ahead and get rolling with our presentation. So I want to start with an article that was published in the Sweat Science column of Outside Magazine. If you're familiar with Sweat Science and Alex Hutchinson's work, this article and what I'm going to read from it will really set the stage for the conversation that we're about to have. And I'm going to quote Alex in what he says here. And he's the author of a book called Endure, Mind, Body, and the Curious Elasticity of Human Performance. He's a scientist as it relates to human endurance. What he says is that when you head to altitude, you have to breathe more deeply and more frequently to compensate for the scarcity of oxygen in the thin air. That means that those muscles that you use to inhale in particular have to work way harder than normal, in fact, consuming 15 to 30% of the total oxygen that you inhale at altitude, and they eventually can get tired. So training these muscles should prepare you to handle that extra work of breathing at altitude. So Umar, as you have a goal of 6,100 meters and potentially 7,000. Sure, the oxygen is going to be scarce. Your respiratory muscles, in particular the inspiratory muscles, will have to work 15 to 30% harder. So let's talk about how breathwork training might help you in this particular case. So our agenda for our webinar today is going to be what challenges that your respiratory system faces at altitude. What exactly is breathwork training and how can it address some of these challenges? What does the research literature say about breathwork training and altitude endurance? And then we're going to get your own breath assessments today, as well as a little taste of the training. And I will advise you on where you can actually go from here. But first, let's cover exactly who I am. I am Anthony LaRubia, as I mentioned earlier. I'm the founder of a company called Recal, which has its origins. The name is short for recalibrate. Recalibrate your mind, recalibrate your body. In this case, we're trying to recalibrate the way in which we breathe. But our origins are in combining mindfulness with adventure travel. And what we found over the course of years in running our company and our trips was that the type of adventure travel that latched on with our clients was the type that you climb a mountain. And the type of mindfulness that worked best with our clients was breathwork training. And so I started to dive more deeply into breathwork and specifically as a way to train for high altitude in order to actually climb mountains. So I got certified in something called the Wim Hof method. Some of you may be familiar with that. I also achieved a certification in Oxygen Advantage, which is breathwork training for more sport and performance. And along the way of receiving these three different certifications, peak flow being the third in breathwork training, I started to read a lot about what you can use breathwork training to then achieve great physical performance, especially at altitude. And I decided to pull this information out of the research and into something that we call the high altitude breathwork training. But along the way of actually doing some of this research, I decided to do a few experiments on myself because what I was reading and what I was seeing out of the literature was, quite frankly, incredible. Maybe even I became a bit skeptical. So I started doing an experiment on myself by signing myself up to run a marathon. However, I was not going to train by running for this marathon. I was going to train just by doing breathwork training. And then when I ran the marathon, I taped my mouth shut and I breathed entirely through my nose for the duration of the marathon. I learned a lot. I finished it. And I really saw the power of how breathwork training can prepare your body as well as your mind to take on great endurance feats. I then took the set of and climbing a mountain. In this particular case of this experiment, I went to 14,000 feet, which is about 4,300 or so meters tall. I then was able to see the adaptations that you can make even if you're training at sea level and how it can relate to the mountain itself and altitude. We, not only myself, but I shared this training with others, a lot of beta testers, a lot of people willing to do these experiments, athletes, mountain guides, pro athletes, owners of tour operators, and eventually recreational athletes that had their own experiments or really expeditions that they wanted to perform better at altitude. And we started to roll out a series of these trainings and eventually landed on what we now call our high altitude breathwork training program. So that's a little bit about me and some of the experiments that we did to get things started in this world of high altitude breathwork training. Let's take a moment for those of you watching live and in the Zoom here. Let's take a moment to do some experiments on ourselves. Let's get an assessment. This assessment that we're going to do now is one of two that you will do during our webinar here, and this is called the carbon dioxide tolerance test. The way that this works is, with me, I'm going to guide you through taking a normal inhale and a normal exhale, and then we're going to take a really deep breath in to fill up the lungs as much as you possibly can. And then when we reach the top of that inhale, we're then going to begin an extremely slow exhale. I'm going to start a timer. And while the timer's running, you try to extend this exhale as lightly but continuously as possible. Try to extend that exhale as long as you possibly can. Get to the point that you're squeezing every last bit of air out of your lungs, maybe even curling forward slightly and pressing the air out. When you need to take a breath, maybe you've been overcome with that feeling of breathlessness, or you've just flat out run out of air in your lungs, take a note of the time that's on the screen, and that is going to be your carbon dioxide tolerance test. So let's do this together. Everybody, take a normal breath in through your nose, a normal breath out, and now begin a deep inhale. Fill up your lungs as much as you can. Fill up, fill up, fill up. And now begin that slow exhale, preferably with your mouth shut. You're just allowing air to trickle out of your nose. Trying to make this as light as possible of an exhale, as slow as possible, but it's one continuous exhale. Try relax your mind, relax your body as you exhale. Prepare yourself for some of that stress that's going to come up from the feeling of breathlessness here. I'm going to let the timer run for a little while longer. If in fact you're still exhaling, awesome job. Again, get to the point that you're squeezing every last bit of air out of your lungs. If you're already done, go ahead and breathe normally. I'll let the timer go for 10 more seconds. For those of you still exhaling, awesome job. All right, I'm going to go ahead and pause the timer now. If you're still going, good for you. You're a hell of a breather. Let's talk about, well, the questions that you might have, obviously, right now, which are, all right, Anthony, how good was my CO2 TT? What are the other assessments that you do? You mentioned one other one. And most importantly, how can I actually improve on this? My answer to you is stick around and find out over the course of the next 40 minutes or so. We're going to cover all of those things. All right. Yes, I just hooked you. Now we're here for the long run. I'm just kidding. So, what are the challenges that someone would face when they set out at altitude, especially in the respiratory system? Now, I want to make a disclaimer here. I am not a medical doctor. Anytime anybody goes to altitude, there are a set of risks that you face in your body. And I always recommend that you do seek medical consultation before going to altitude. And I just want to confirm I know a very skinny sliver of the pie that is all the things that happen to your body at altitude. I am here in this webinar just going to be covering things related to respiratory system and how you can address them using breathwork training. Now, we're going to go through three things that happen to your body when you arrive at altitude. The first one is you may experience an increase in ventilation. Ventilation is just a fancy way of saying how many times you breathe per minute, your respiratory rate. The second thing you may face at altitude is an increase in the hemoglobin concentration. That's your red blood cells in the blood. This happens typically in most people over the course of time through a process called acclimatization on the mountain. The third thing that you may face when you arrive at altitude is a decrease in your oxygen saturation levels, particularly in your blood, but as well as in your muscle tissue. This leads to a decrease in the aerobic power, as well as your VO2 max, in the blood and in your body. These are three common things that happen to people at altitude, and they present some challenges. So, great. I just listed for you some challenges that you might face at altitude. Now, how does breathwork training actually address this? What does it have to do with it? Let's make the connection here, shall we? Coming right back to where we were, these three challenges that you face at altitude. Well, there are, at least in the way that we coach breathwork training, there are three sides to our breathwork training. The first side is mechanical efficiency. And of course, I lined that up here with the increased ventilation challenge that you face because, as you might have guessed, maybe you're picking up what I'm putting down. Mechanical efficiency is related to addressing the challenge that you face with increased ventilation. We want you to breathe in the most mechanically efficient and proper way all the time, but in particular, if you're at altitude on the mountain, you've got a race or you've got an expedition. The second side of breathwork training that we cover in our training programs is making high altitude adaptations. We use a specific type of breathwork training called high altitude simulation, which addresses, you might have guessed it, that element of acclimatization and increasing the hemoglobin concentration in your blood. I will dive more deeply into all these things here soon, so don't worry. This is just a high level addressing of each of the sides. The third side, and maybe the most profound and substantial side of breathwork training as we coach it today, is respiratory muscle training. And this can address that common challenge that people face with a decrease in their oxygen saturation levels and subsequent decrease in aerobic power and VO2 max. So let's go through each of these one at a time, talk about how breathwork training addresses them, and then we'll even dive a bit into the scientific literature of each of these. So starting with the mechanical efficiency side, what you can do with breathwork training is begin to fix bad habits that you may have around your breathing and ultimately improve the efficiency of your breathing. And when I say efficient breathing, if there's one thing I want you to take away from this webinar, there's a lot of things I want you to take away from this webinar, but one thing in particular is that I want you to start to breathe as often as possible throughout your day, whether you are at rest, whether you're training, or whether you're on the mountain acclimatizing. I want you to attempt to breathe with your nose, breathe slow, and breathe low. Low as in the lowest part of your lungs. Engage the belly and the diaphragm with each and every breath. This is a proper, mechanically efficient way of breathing. This also can eliminate the dead space, which is basically unused space in our respiratory tract, basically from the edge of our nose down into the top of our lungs. This is dead space. This is unused air. If you breathe in this way, you can eliminate the impact that that dead space has with each and every one of your breaths. You can also increase and use your full lung capacity by focusing on mechanical efficient breathing. You can also properly engage your diaphragm and your intercostal muscles. Those are the muscles that actually are designed to do your breathing. And lastly, you can eliminate over breathing. I'll dive a bit more into the science of this in a bit, but just trust me on saying over breathing. If you breathe maybe upwards of 18 breaths per minute and even higher than that, if you breathe anything in that range, you're actually over breathing, which oftentimes people think that you're getting more oxygen in. In fact, you are doing your body a disservice when it comes to oxygenation by over breathing. Let's look just briefly here into the literature, scientific literature and studies that have been done on this type of efficient breathing, slow, deep breathing when at altitude. They did a study on healthy, quote unquote, lowlanders. These are the lowly people, just kidding, that live at sea level. And they were climbing at 4,600 meters and then 5,400 meters, doing some tests in the way in which they breathe. They had their SpO2 assessed during this scientific experiment, which is basically just your oxygen saturation levels of your blood, just after doing 15 minutes of slow, deep breathing. And what they found was that the SpO2 levels of the individuals that did do this style of breathing versus the ones that didn't were able to increase their SpO2 by 7.6 to 9.3%. This is extremely significant. Most of us at sea level or at rest hover between 95% to 99% in percentage saturation of oxygen in the blood. When you're at altitude, you can drop substantially into the 80s, maybe even for some into the 70s, depending on your altitude and your acclimatization level, just by changing the way that you breathe. This research showed that you can increase by roughly 8% or so on average, 8.5% on average. This is substantial. So think about the way in which you breathe when you're arriving at altitude. Now, zooming in on the second category side of breathwork training, let's talk about high altitude adaptation. Using something called intermittent hypoxic hypercapnic training, which is a style of breathwork training that brings your body into a hypoxic state, which means low oxygen, as well as a hypercapnic oxide, high carbon dioxide training. This is also known as high altitude simulation training. You can begin to make a few adaptations in your body. Specifically, you can increase your hemoglobin concentration and subsequently your VO2 max as a result of the increase in hemoglobin, as well as increase your carbon dioxide tolerance. CO2 tolerance is a very, very important element of breathwork training and breathing in general. You might have noticed that assessment that we did earlier was called the carbon dioxide tolerance test. So as you can see from that assessment, as well as what I'm saying here, this is a very important part of breathwork training. Why is it so important? So if you were to hold your breath right now, in fact, why don't you go ahead and do it? Just take a normal breath in, a normal breath out. and just hold your breath after that exhale. Give yourself a little bit of time. You might notice that over this course of time, you start to feel out of breath. Many people attribute this to a quote unquote lack of oxygen. Oh, I needed to take a breath. I was running out of oxygen. By the way, if you're still holding your breath, go ahead and take a normal breath. You might at this point have actually sensed that feeling of out of breath. That is not a lack of oxygen in this particular case. That is the rise in the carbon dioxide levels of your blood. So if you can train your tolerance to carbon dioxide, you can start to feel less out of breath, especially when you're exercising or climbing at altitude or running a race at altitude. If you feel less out of breath, you can then decrease your rate of perceived exertion, RPE. RPE has been shown to be connected very tightly to endurance. And if you feel like you are exerting your body less, there's this really funky but substantial connection between the mind and your body here. And you can unlock more endurance by just feeling less like you're exerting less, and that is tied to the feeling of being out of breath. Your respiratory rate is closely tied to your RPE, rate of perceived exertion. The last thing that I'll say is you can prevent overbreathing. If you have a better CO2 tolerance, you then don't feel like you need to breathe so many times per minute because when we exhale carbon dioxide. So if you have a higher tolerance to that, you don't need to exhale so often. What preventing overbreathing can lead to has to do with something, a specific concept called the Bohr effect, BOHR, Bohr effect. What that showed is those hemoglobin, the protein in your red blood cells that you can see floating around on the middle of our screen here, they are the ones that run up to your lungs, grab the oxygen, and then go to deliver it down through the various places you are climbing or exerting energy in that way. There's a connection between the hemoglobin and the oxygen molecules. This connection, it happens to be very tight and strong in a high pH environment. So if that hemoglobin is going to deliver the oxygen to the muscle tissue that needs it, it in fact cannot let go of it as easily if you're in a high pH environment. What happens when you offload a lot of carbon dioxide is the pH of your blood goes up. So you can see that if you're hyperventilating or overbreathing, exhaling often, that means the pH goes up and the hemoglobin is not going to release the oxygen. Whereas to the contrary of that, if you keep your breathing rate steady, somewhat slow and controlled, you then can maintain slightly higher level of CO2 in your blood, keep the pH slightly lower, and that's going to allow the hemoglobin to release the oxygen throughout your body much more easily. So you can tell that you'll be able to get oxygen out of the blood and into your muscle tissue much more if in fact you're able to keep your breathing rate slow and controlled. And in order to do that, you need a good CO2 tolerance. So let's look at the research as it relates to this high altitude adaptation piece of the equation. There was a study done where subjects did this IHHT style of breathing, that's intermittent hypoxic hypercapnic training, and they looked at the impact that that had on the individual's hemoglobin concentration and their subsequent VO2 max. So these subjects for 30 to 45 minutes 3 times a week for 8 weeks went through this intermittent hypoxic hypercapnic breathwork training protocol. And this was done at sea level, by the way. So there was no acclimatization involved in this particular study. After the study was done, they reassessed these subjects' hemoglobin concentration, and what they found was an increase of 5.35% in their hemoglobin concentration, and that resulted in a nearly 11% increase in their VO2 max. So as you can see, by doing this high altitude simulation style breathwork training from anywhere in the world, sea level, etc., you can start to make some adaptations in your body that will help you when you arrive on the mountain. I want to make it clear that we don't believe that there's any substitute necessarily for acclimatization, or at least there are experts out there that really focus on that. We are not one of those, We do believe in the concept of acclimatization. We are just pointing out some things from a breathwork training standpoint that you can do that can help make your body more ready to take on that acclimatization process. All right, I've thrown a lot of stuff at you. Let's take a pause and do another breath assessment. The second one is called the location of movement, or LOM for short. The way that this assessment works is I want you to go ahead and place a hand on your chest. I'm going to strip down. I'm gonna do this so that you can see things a little bit more clearly here as I experiment and give you an example of this. One hand on your chest, one hand on your lower belly. Look down the front of your body, and I want you to begin to breathe normally, just like you normally would. Take a few normal breaths here and just observe where you notice the movement happening. With which hand do you sense is moving? Which part of your body do you feel like is expanding and contracting with each breath? Do you notice some movement in your upper chest, in your rib cage, in your lower belly? Where is the movement happening? You can split, we often, when coaching breathwork training, split the location of movement into three different zones. You got zone one, which is the lower part of your belly. Zone two is, which is the mid chest. Zone three is upper chest, clavicle, your collarbone, shoulders area. So as you were observing, which zone did you notice that you were breathing, but also which zone do you believe is best? Thanks for contributing that. Um, So maybe you notice that you're breathing in zone two, right? That middle area of the rib cage. So we want to see as much as possible you breathing, in fact, in that zone one area, the lower belly, and maybe a bit of zone two. But we really want to avoid zone three. Again, this is that dead space area where any oxygen that comes into zone three doesn't get into the lower lobes of your bronchi and your lungs, therefore it doesn't get diffused into your bloodstream. But also, it typically means you're engaging muscles up here in the upper chest and shoulder area. Those are not the muscles that are designed to do your breathing. Specifically, on an inhalation, the muscle designed to do your breathing is your diaphragm, which exists below your lungs. And when you inhale, it flattens out, and when you exhale, it curls back up. This is your breathing motor. And if you breathe through your nose, it actually engages that diaphragm even more. We want to see as much zone one breathing as possible. So thanks for doing that. Let's also, because I promised this, just quickly talk about the score ranges. By the way, there are a few other breathwork assessments that we do as part of a proper breathwork training. In fact, we in total coach up about 5 of them. Another one's called a BOLT score. Credit to Oxygen Advantage for that. Another one is called Maximum Breathlessness Test. That's what you see there, an MBT. What you did earlier was the CO2 TT. If you had a score within the 20 to 40 second range, that's fairly low on this score range. And it typically means that you may be an overbreather and your sensitivity to carbon dioxide is fairly high. The sensitivity, that is, not tolerance. 40 to 60 is okay to good, but still not great. 60 is kind of that threshold that we want to see people dive into. Over 60, it's a strong sign that you've got good functional breathing happening. And if you're about to take on an extremely high altitude challenge, I love to see clients that are in the 80 to 100 range. So that gives you an idea of breath assessments. And if you want to do a BOLT or an MBT, we have a lot of other content, especially on our community platform, which I'll share at the end of this, that you can go to and do those other assessments. So back to where we were. We were just about to dive into that third side of breathwork training, which is respiratory muscle training. Let's talk about that, what you can do in your body, and take a quick look at some research that's been done in this category. So when I say respiratory muscle training, I'm specifically referring to that diaphragm that I talked about earlier, that dome-shaped muscle beneath the lungs. It also connects to the spine in the back, and also your intercostal muscles, which are the muscles in between each rib bone in your rib cage. Now, with a proper respiratory muscle training program, you can maintain a higher blood oxygen saturation level when you're at altitude. This is what the research has shown, which we'll talk about here in a moment. You also then can reduce the respiratory muscle fatigue that you may face. That's at any elevation, when you're at sea level training or whether you're at 8,000 meters, you can reduce the respiratory muscle fatigue by, of course, training those muscles. You can then also increase your ability to adapt your body to acclimatization, is what the literature has shown. And you can also improve your breathing economy, basically how much energy you have to exert to do something as quote unquote simple as breathing. You leave the muscles that are designed to do your breathing, and the other locomotor muscles, for example, in your body to do what they're designed to do, which is move your body, say up a mountain. This also will decrease your RPE. Again, that's that rate of perceived exertion. Now, in a good breathwork training program, you do want to focus both on the inspiratory as well as expiratory muscles. Let's take a look at what the literature has to say about this respiratory muscle training. In fact, this has got a lot of deep research into it. What I pulled out was just one particular study that was done for inspiratory muscle training, but there's been a review on multiple studies, and a lot of it shows some of the same stuff that I think we can highlight with this study. This was an inspiratory muscle training study and its subsequent impact on the blood oxygen saturation levels of individuals that went to altitude. So what these people did was, before an expedition in the Himalayas, I believe this was done in Nepal specifically, 2 times a day for 4 weeks, these individuals did basically inspiratory muscle training using a device that blocked 50% of their airway. And whether you're with a device or not, if you have a finger and you have 2 nostrils, you can block one of those nostrils, and that will be your 50% inspiratory muscle training exercise, right? And over the course of the 4 weeks, they did this training, and then they went on the expedition, and their blood oxygen saturation levels were analyzed, them versus a control group, at sea level, 400 meters, 1,400 meters, 4,880 meters, and 5,550 meters. What they found, number one, was after their inspiratory muscle training, they did find that their inhalation strength increased by 15%. This is typically analyzed by something called MIP, which stands for mouth inhalation pressure. That MIP increased by 15%. So, okay, great. They're now stronger inhalation breathers. That's cool, but did it actually translate on the mountain? What they found was there was no change in the control group versus the study group at any elevation below 4,880 meters. But at that elevation and above, and by the way, they went from 1,400 meters to 4,800 meters. That's quite a ways in between. Maybe there was some benefit to it, but at the very least, definitely above 4,880 meters, they found that the individuals that trained their respiratory muscles were able to keep their blood oxygen saturation levels at a 6% or higher on average level than the controlled group that did not study this. And this was as much as 10% of, of a maintained higher blood oxygen saturation level. This is extremely significant and substantial if you're climbing at altitude. So all of this stuff, of this scientific literature, as I mentioned earlier, I looked at this and I'm like, man, this stuff like really shows some impressive results. But how in the world do I bring it out of the lab and into the real world? And that is when, after experiments on eventual recreational athletes that were doing expeditions up in the mountain, we eventually came to concluding and launching our high altitude breathwork training program. And in particular, our first offering to the world is this 5-week pre-acclimatization block of fitness. That's the last 5 weeks before going on an expedition, breathwork training program geared toward altitude endurance. And we have had hundreds of athletes now, recreational athletes going on an expedition, or even pro athletes climbing 8,000ers. They have done this breathwork training, and we've had incredible results. We've even been featured in the media. That's pretty sweet that someone on our webinar right now is one of the people featured in that article. Shout out to Umar for climbing that 6,000er on very short acclimatization schedule after doing some breathwork training. And we've been lucky enough to be able to work with companies like Grajales down at Aconcagua and their incoming clients to climb Aconcagua. It's been quite special in just the year really since we launched this program publicly. So let's have you experience just a bit more of the training. We're going to do an exercise together. I'm going to coach you through it. And then we're going to talk about where you can actually go from here as it relates to your training. So from a seated position, and if in fact you're watching this and you're standing, or you're watching this on your phone, walking around outside or something like that, I'm going to ask very gently that you go ahead and take a seat. Find a seated position. We're going to do something specifically targeting your carbon dioxide tolerance, and this is an exercise called Breathe Light. Once again, I want to shout out Oxygen Advantage for this particular exercise. The way that it works is just like the name would suggest, you're going to breathe lighter than you normally would. And the way in which I invite you to do this is take your pointer finger, place it just beneath your nose, relax your shoulder. We don't want much tension up there in the shoulder and the back. Resting maybe on your upper lip, and take a couple of normal breaths in and out through your nose and feel the air as it runs across your finger. After taking these few normal breaths, maybe you notice some cool air maybe running across your finger on the way in, and then some warmer, maybe more moisture in this air as it runs back out across your finger. You get a feel for what this feels like on your finger. Now, keep your finger there and begin to slow down your breathing to the point that you can barely feel the air anymore as it runs across your finger on the way in and back out across your finger on the way out. Begin to breathe lighter, so light again that you can barely feel the air on your finger. But maybe over the course of time here, you start to get this feeling like you need to take a bigger breath. That's something in the breathwork world that we call air hunger, the hunger for more air, to take a bigger breath. This is the feeling that we're trying to introduce in the body. And this is also a physical, sensational sign that your carbon dioxide levels are rising in the blood, and you're not giving your body that satisfaction of exhaling off that carbon dioxide. So for the next 30 seconds, stick with that very light breathing pace, straddle that line between comfort and discomfort, and do your best to control your breathing on the way in and control your breathing on the way out. We're here for just 15 more seconds. If you feel like your breathing is becoming erratic, in particular, maybe at the top of an inhale or the bottom of the exhale, and it's hard to control, maybe take a couple of normal breaths and come back to it. We're here for 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Good. You can drop your finger. Breathe normally in and out. In fact, let's do a quick exercise to offload CO2 very quickly. You could use this to downshift the nervous system if you feel stressed, but you can also use this during training if you need to offload CO2. It's like you can't catch your breath. This is called a physiological sigh. How it works is you take a double inhale through your nose and an exhale through your mouth. So with me, take a normal inhale through your nose. Pause for just a moment and then inhale again through your nose and then exhale out through your mouth. Let's do 3 more. Inhale, pause, inhale again, exhale. Inhale, pause, inhale, exhale. Last one. Inhale, pause, inhale, exhale. Good. You may feel like you got that breath control back. You might even feel more relaxed than you did before. That's the physiological sigh. It's the single quickest way for us to offload CO2. Use it wisely. If you're training specifically for carbon dioxide tolerance, I wouldn't advise using that because we're trying to get our body used to the CO2 levels. But if you're on the mountain, you're running, you are in a tricky situation, mountaineering, and you need to both offload CO2 quickly because you're out of breath, but you also maybe need to downshift your nervous system. You can use that in order to achieve those results. So let's take a look now. And if you're just joining us here, I see that another just popped in. We are going through a few example exercises that you can use for breathwork training. There's a specific, I'm going to talk about two different exercises that you can use for respiratory muscle training, both on the strength training side as well as endurance building side of respiratory muscle training. There's an exercise that we use in our breathwork training called hook lying diaphragmatic breathing. The way that this works is you get into a hook lying position, which is, as this image shows, lying down on your back, maybe even having your hands there, but that's not mandatory. But create a 90-degree right angle with your knees and your feet flat on the ground. This is a hook lying position. And what you do in this position is take strong inhales through your nose and passive exhales through your mouth or nose, whatever you want to use, passive exhalations. But what you want to focus on here is breathing with your diaphragm, that dome-shaped muscle again beneath your lungs that flattens out on an inhale and it curls back up in a dome on an exhale. You can even use a one blocked nostril, as we showed earlier, which is a 50% air resistance. That resistance is going to engage those muscles more strongly, going to give you a bit more of an intense workout. You can also add weight to that lower belly, and that weight will then create more resistance for that diaphragm to contract and flatten out. So through air resistance as well as weight resistance, you can increase the intensity. The second respiratory muscle training exercise I'll talk about is an expiratory one. And this is something very fun that even kids can do, which is called balloon breathing. The fun doesn't stop when you're an adult, I promise. What you do here is you take a balloon. Let's see if I have a balloon. I mean, of course I have a balloon. I'm a breathwork coach. This is my handy dandy breathwork device pouch. I've got a very fun thing called a sports mask, which is an altitude simulation. I've got a tape measure. I've also got a pulse oximeter. Anyway, what I really wanted is this very sophisticated breathwork training device, a balloon. What you do is from a seated position, or you can do it in a 90-90 position like the image shows here. You want to keep that back straight. You want to focus on the breathing happening in your lower belly here. Your abdomen muscle is your primary exhalation muscle. And all that you do is maybe in the course of 1 minute, you blow up this balloon as many times as you can. Notice my back isn't moving back and forth. I'm keeping that fairly still, and most of the pressure is coming from the abdomen. Deep inhale, maybe through your nose. Strong exhale through your mouth. You may have noticed a slight curl here, but not a full-blown movement that way. This will create the pressure in that abdomen and help to strengthen your expiratory muscles. If you don't have a balloon and you still want to do this type of exercise, just make a fist and blow into that fist like you're trying to warm up your hand. Okay, so that is an example of an expiratory muscle training exercise. We coach quite a few of those in our breathwork training programs. If you're going to join me tomorrow morning, I'm hosting a free 25-minute guided coaching session, we do all sorts of different expiratory and inspiratory muscle training exercises. Now let's talk about high altitude simulation. What does that look like exactly? So I'm going to walk you through, no pun intended, I guess, a walk to jog variation of high altitude simulation. Again, this is also known as intermittent hypoxic, low oxygen, hypercapnic, high carbon dioxide. CAP is the root, I guess, somewhere along the way of medical terminology of CO2 training. And the way that it works is, big diagram here, stick with me. You, from a standing position with some space to be able to walk or jog, you take a normal breath in, a normal breath out. You pinch your nose and hold your breath, and you begin to walk. When you reach the point during this walk that you have a medium to strong level of air hunger, that feeling like you need to take a breath, instead of giving your body that delicious breath, you're torturing your body by continuing to hold your breath, and you begin a slight jog. And you can even turn that jog into a run. Go as long as you can on that one breath, and when you're done, you stop, release your nose if you're still holding it, and take 6 minimal breaths, just enough of a breath to shuttle air in and out through your nose. What this is going to do is it's going to trick your diaphragm into thinking it's taking a full breath, and that diaphragm is going to do some of that delicious contracting, building strength training. It's like a bicep curl for your diaphragm, is what those 6 minimal breaths can do. And then when you're done with those minimal breaths, doing your best to maintain that high stress feeling of breathlessness there, you then return to normal breathing, nose slow and low, for 12 to 18 breaths. Then you can continue and do that again. So this is what one version on steps or a small hill. We also have variations on a Stairmaster. We also have other variations all in one line. We do sometimes use something like a sports mask to restrict the breathing when you come out of this breath hold. As you can tell, this can get pretty intense, but it is ultra effective to both create some of those altitude adaptations in your body, not the least of which is creating new red blood cells and carbon dioxide tolerance. Okay, so we just talked a lot about training that you can do before going on an expedition or before your race at altitude on the mountain. But what about breathing on the mountain itself? We do coach up some on-mountain breathwork protocols. The first of which is just how to breathe, period. How do you actually breathe most of the time when you're on the mountain? So we talk about that in our training. I'll give you a hint. It does relate to breathing nose slow and low. Every now and then, slow is not either feasible or appropriate, but we do want to breathe with the nose and breathe as low as possible. By the way, I want to call out the fact that breathing through the nose, especially in cold air or dry, arid air, something like the air you'd face at Aconcagua, down south, or obviously cold air at altitude is kind of the norm. When you breathe through your nose, you are humidifying the air, adding moisture to it. You're regulating the temperature of the air. So if it's very cold, you're warming it up so it can be best received by the body. You're also doing a bunch of other things breathing through your nose. You're actually engaging the diaphragm, which typically then sends air deeper into the lungs. You are filtering the air. You are actually using the instrument that your body has that's been designed to do your breathing, as opposed to mouth breathing. If you can humidify the air, regulate the temperature of the air, filter the air, you then can hopefully prevent any sort of inflammation from happening in your airways. And oftentimes, that concept that many people talk about, exercise-induced asthma, or really it's exercise-induced bronchial constriction. By breathing through your nose, you can typically eliminate the risk of that happening. So I just wanted to call out that fact that nose breathing is ultra important, especially on the mountain through cold and dry conditions. We also coach on mountain protocols like recovery breathing, which is a very specific type of breath work that we train people in between acclimatization hikes on the mountain, or after a hard workout from anywhere in the world. We also coach something called AMS, acute mountain sickness breathing, for some of those lower rising on the mountain. I want to talk just quickly here about a case study at Aconcagua with the expedition operator Grajales. So a typical person might see the summit down at Aconcagua on a 30 to 35% success rate. That's kind of what is the norm down there at Aconcagua. Over the course of years, they've generated those types of numbers. In our first season in working with Grajales incoming clients, we saw a 71% summit success rate, which I'm very, very proud of that number. One example in particular, Dave, he gave me permission to share some of this. Dave was somebody that in his 2023 attempt at Aconcagua, he came down with HAPE, high altitude pulmonary edema, and he was taken off the mountain as a result of that. In his 2024 attempt, after doing our breathwork training program and then climbing with Grajales, he did achieve a successful summit, and there's him at the top of Aconcagua. So this is just a quick case study of some success that we've had with our breathwork training programs. You might be wondering now, we're shortly coming up on wrapping up, and then I can open up for any questions that anybody might have. But where can you go from here with your training? There are three ways that we offer right now, really four ways actually, to train. The first way is through a personal training package. This is you get me one-on-one in advance of an expedition or a race, and that costs, just so that you know, I'm throwing out the numbers so that you're aware, $875, and that's a 5-week program, and you're going to get me 3 times on that program, and it will be customized and tailored to your specific needs. Our most popular offer, though, is something called the online video course. We have all of our training descriptions, exercise videos, demos, all that type of insight and knowledge housed online through a video course, and that is $275. And then we also have the self-guided program, which is just the program on paper, you following it along yourself. The most accessible opportunity here to do breathwork training at $75. We also are very proud that actually it was last week, technically, we launched our Training Peaks program. So if you, in fact, use the platform and app called Training Peaks, we did just launch our Training Peaks program there, which is really cool. I want to offer out to any of the people on this webinar viewing on Zoom, YouTube, wherever it is that you're viewing this right now, we've got a couple of special offers for you. Next Friday, we are going to be starting a new group training program. And if you buy the online training program at $275, as I talked about, between now and Friday, I'll throw you into the group training at no extra cost to you. And what you'll be able to get is a value similar to the personal coaching, with me actually coaching you through 3 times full training sessions. By the way, we do have the QR code there that you can go to actually cash in on these offers. I also want to offer to you a free one-time drop-in to one of our 45-minute live training sessions. These are hosted every Monday morning USA time. And it's normally an $85 monthly membership that gets these 45-minute live training sessions. Also, it's $30 for a drop-in there. But for those of you watching the webinar, I want to offer you a one-time drop-in for absolutely free. So come join us for 45 minutes of breathing. It's more sophisticated than that, I promise. And then lastly, of course, I want to offer a free consultation. Are you expedition ready with your breathing? Expedition or race ready, I guess I should say, for those of you doing ultra marathons in the mountains. So this is oh man, I needed to change that and I didn't, but our new handle on Instagram and Facebook is Recal Training, not Recal Travel anymore. Anyway, you can reach us at those areas. And again, there's that QR code if you want to scan that and go to that landing page for some of that stuff. I want to leave you with just one last thing. The second ever USA-based woman to climb K2 is an amazing person called Lisa Thompson. She's a mountaineer, founder of a company called Alpine Athletics. And in her experience, she has done this breathwork training. She's also worked with clients, coaching clients of hers, and people that have gone on group climbs that have done this breathwork training. And this is what she has to say about our breathwork training. I won't read it live, but just know that I'm very humbled by the kind words that she says about the value of our breathwork training program. This is someone who really knows her stuff, and it means a lot to have her say that we've done a good job of bringing the breathwork training out of the research lab and into the real world so that we can achieve higher summits and go further with our races in the mountains. With that, I will open up to any Q&A that any of you might have. You can either send a text in the platform where you're watching, whether that's on YouTube or on Zoom. You can send the text up. Also, if you're on Zoom, you can feel free to unmute yourself. That's fine as well, and I can address any questions you have. I will give it just another 30 seconds here, and I'll pretend like I
Hi,
know. Go ahead. Yeah, I think I just heard somebody.
hi, Anthony. This is Umar.
Hey,
Um,
Umar.
so nice to see the quick recap and such an amazing program. And I was doing the
Yeah.
CO2 TT test with you, and I'm still 50 plus, and which is great. So I was looking at you, and I see you have introduced some new breathwork, such as that EMT workout
Yeah.
plans, and I guess these get constantly updated if you we are a member of online course, right?
Yes. Yes, good question. And by the way, you're right. So you did the breathwork training right in our beta phase when we were launching it, just to a few select people, kind of hand to hand when I was doing that. And that was a little bit early on. Uh, we have updated the training. This is a constant process of refinement and improvement. We get a lot of feedback. New research is being uncovered between myself and my team here that are creating these programs. And so you're absolutely right. I think since you've done it, we've expanded the respiratory muscle training offerings, EMT, expiratory muscle training, as well as IMT, inspiratory muscle training. Now, anytime that there's an update done to our training, we do make the updates on the training platform. So if in fact you did purchase that online video course, which I know that you're a member of, that will be automatically updated. So maybe the next time that you do your training for a future expedition, or if you just have some sort of maintenance training program going, you may notice that that's automatically updated and you can hopefully get more out of your training that way. I do want to call out one thing, Umar, in your specific case. You came in when we were on the platform Podia. As of literally this coming week, you may have seen an email from me as well. We're moving things to our own personal community platform. This is run through something called Mighty Networks, and everything will be shifting over there. And that's good because that also offers us more capabilities from a live stream coaching standpoint, more and more content opportunities, ways to engage with our mountain athlete community and all of that. So have a heads up for that, but that will be certainly maintained. Sweet. Um, if there's any other questions, feel free to drop them in. Maybe I'll be able to answer as I wrap up here. But know that if you in fact came to this later than our start time, or if you just missed it in general, I am going to be, of course, sharing the recording with those of you that registered for our webinar. I want to thank you all so much for coming. I hope that this provides some value to you in learning about the ways in which you can use breathwork training to not only climb a mountain, but also go further in the mountains. I always like to say breathwork training. Breathe stronger, breathe more efficiently so you can climb higher and go further. Thank you so much for joining. Take care, everybody. Bye now.